A Rolex is not impressive because it tells time. Any $10 watch can do that. What makes Rolex different is that it survived nearly every reason it should have failed. War, taxation, technological disruption, an industry collapse that erased most of its competitors. That survival was not luck. It was the result of deliberate decisions made over more than a century, starting with a man who didn't come from wealth, prestige, or even the watch industry itself. Hans Wilsdorf was orphaned at a young age. By 12, both of his parents were gone. He was sent to boarding school by relatives and later moved to Switzerland, where he found work as a translator for a large watch exporting firm. That job placed him inside the center of Swiss watchmaking. Wilsdorf was not an engineer, but he had access to the people who were. One of them was Hermann Egler, who ran a factory producing watch movements. If a watch is a body, the movement is the heart. It determines whether the watch lives, dies, or falls under pressure. At the beginning of the 20th century, wristwatches were not taken seriously. They were viewed as fragile accessories, worn mostly by women. Men of status preferred pocket watches, which were larger, heavier, and socially accepted. Wilsdorf believed this would change. In 1905, he moved to England and started a company with his brother-in-law, Alfred Davis. Their plan was simple: import high-quality Swiss movements, assemble wristwatches, and sell them through local jewelers. The watches sold well, but Wilsdorf noticed a problem. Customers remembered the store, not the company behind the product. It was like building a great engine and letting someone else put their logo on the hood. So Wilsdorf created a brand. In 1908, he registered a name that was short, distinctive, and easy to pronounce across languages: Rolex. From that point forward, the name appeared directly on the dial. The watch would no longer hide behind the retailer. To prove Rolex watches were not just fashionable but accurate, Wilsdorf pursued certification. In 1910, Rolex received Swiss chronometer certification. 4 years later, a Rolex wristwatch became the first of its kind to earn a precision rating from the Kew Observatory in London. That distinction mattered. Then came the First World War. Soldiers needed wristwatches. Pocket watches were impractical in combat. Wristwatches became tools rather than accessories, and Rolex gained a reputation for reliability under harsh conditions. But the war also created financial pressure. Britain imposed heavy import taxes on luxury goods, nearly breaking the business. Wilsdorf responded by moving Rolex to Geneva in 1919. From there, the company focused on its next major problem: water. Moisture was the enemy of mechanical watches. Waterproof designs existed, but they were unreliable and difficult to produce at scale. Rolex solved this in 1926 with the Oyster case. The concept was simple in theory and difficult in execution. Seal the case completely and prevent the crown from breaking that seal. If earlier watches were like houses with open windows, the Oyster was a vault. A few years later, Rolex introduced the self-winding movement. Instead of manually winding the watch each day, the motion of the wearer's wrist kept it running. Once again, Wilsdorf paired engineering with storytelling. In 1927, a swimmer named Mercedes Gleitz attempted to cross the English Channel wearing a Rolex Oyster. She didn't complete the swim, but the watch functioned perfectly after hours in cold salt water. Rolex made sure people heard about it. This became a pattern. Rolex watches appeared alongside explorers, pilots, and record breakers. In 1933, the first flight over Mount Everest was completed with a Rolex present. In 1935, Malcolm Campbell broke the land speed record wearing one. In 1960, a Rolex was attached to the outside of the vessel that reached the deepest point of the ocean. The message was subtle but consistent. Rolex worked where failure was not an option. In 1946, the company introduced Tudor, a more affordable brand focused on reliability rather than prestige. Hans Wilsdorf died in 1960, and ownership of Rolex transferred to a private foundation bearing his name. Soon after, the watch industry faced its greatest threat. Quartz watches entered the market. They were cheaper, lighter, and far more accurate than mechanical watches. By the early 1980s, most Swiss watchmakers were gone. Rolex survived by refusing to compete. Accuracy no longer mattered. Craft did. Rolex doubled down on mechanical complexity, hand assembly, and total control over production. Nothing was outsourced. Manufacturing slowed. Prices increased. The watch stopped being a tool and became an artifact. Today, Rolex produces a small fraction of the world's watches, yet captures a disproportionate share of the industry's value. It doesn't need to explain itself anymore. Its meaning was built slowly, decision by decision, across generations. What it represents depends on the person wearing it, but the machine itself has remained consistent, deliberate, mechanical, uncompromising. That is how Rolex survived.